Providing a dose of rationality, critical thinking, and skepticism from a conservative atheist perspective, this is the Bitchspot Report podcast. Every week, your host will bring you news of note and commentary on topics of interest in hopes of sparking intelligent discussion on important issues of the day. It's not pretty, it's probably not safe for work, but we tell it like it is and offer no quarter to the credulous, the gullible, or the downright stupid. It's not for the easily offended or for the religiously or liberally minded, but it is about 90 minutes of secular conservative entertainment. So let's get right to the show. It's a weird week and we're here to talk about it. Welcome to the Bitchspot Report podcast. Every week, we show up to talk about crazy religious stories and absurd political stupidity so you don't have to. This week, Tom DeLay is delusional, or more delusional than normal. There's a reason those Oregon bakers were fined, and it isn't what they claim. The fundies are out to train 1,000 pastors to run for political office, all so they can spread the love of Jesus. Texas will become a wasteland after the Supreme Court overthrew rules on eyebrow threading. Then we revisit some of our older stories that we keep promising to revisit, so there you go. Sit down, plug in, and enjoy this episode of the Bitchspot Report. How are we doing this week?
Well, I am surviving. I am hot, but we are surviving. How about yourself?
No issues at all. No worries.
Got to go to a convention where there were far too many people, but hey, I gotta take the train, which was actually kind of fun.
Oh, you actually went, huh?
I went, I took Amtrak, and you know what? It's kind of nice sitting in a train watching all those people stopped in traffic. They were just, like waving as you go on. But, it was nice. For those who don't know, I used to do comic books, and I occasionally go to what must be the world's most crowded comic book convention. But, it was fun. It was cooler than it is here, and I got to do what I normally do around the town. So.
Yeah, we don't go. Seriously, we will never, ever, ever go again so long as they stay in San Diego. It's too big for the town. There's no possible way they can fix it. Actually, the only way they could actually fix Comic-Con is if they split it into two conventions, put all the comics and all the fandom stuff at like a winter con, and then they just put all the Hollywood stuff at the summer con, and then maybe the town could survive it, but otherwise, forget it.
And also for those of us listening, just to remind people, since this has happened occasionally in the past, if you hear this and you say, gee, I want to go, maybe we should drive by when it's happening to buy some tickets and go in for a day. No, you have to get your tickets well in advance. If anyone tells you, let's just drop by to the Comic-Con, you will not get in. So if you're listening to this and thinking about going, make sure to get your tickets early.
Well, it's because the tickets sell out in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
135,000 tickets sell out in 10 minutes. All the hotels would sell out in about 5 minutes. There's no parking at all. You cannot park in the entire city.
Actually, I found out when I was walking around, there is parking further up in the city, but you've got to walk a ways, and it's also generally running anywhere from $30 to $40 a day, so you're going to pay for it. But on another amusing note, for some reason, the Ninth Circuit Court was down in the same hotel room having a judicial conference. So I'm not entirely certain if Darth Vader walked into the room by accident and how the justices reacted. But that was an interesting dichotomy.
Hey, you never know. Maybe the justices got into costume and went to the con.
I'm not certain. I don't know if I would be happy or scared if I'm going for my appeal for some heavy-duty crime and there's one of the justices wearing Darth Vader's outfit. I don't know if I could appeal to him as a fellow fanboy or hope that, okay, just please don't really get into the role too much. But, so.
Yeah, well, I was watching some of the panels on YouTube. There's really no reason to even go anymore, but I still get to watch every damn panel in the entire thing. So we sat down and we watched about 30 panels on YouTube, and they did the big Star Wars thing. And it was funny. They had all the original cast in there, and they had Mark Hamill, and he was telling the story about how back in 1977 when he got married, just after, the movie came out, he and his wife went to Tahiti, and somebody spoofed him and was like driving a speedboat at him wearing Darth Vader mask, and he was just going, holy shit, I can't get away from this no matter where I go.
Well, that is the price of being part of a cultural phenomena.
Yeah, that was really cool. That right after they had it's probably the only way you'll ever clear Hall H in that convention, was they took the entire Hall H over to Petco Park and had a live Star Wars, concert. So they cleared the entire place.
Yeah, I mean, we grump about it being too crowded, but if someone does want to go, and you can handle crowds, I mean, because some people can't, but if you ever do get a chance to go, it is really neat if you are into that sort of thing. I mean, if you are into the sci-fi comic fantasydom, it is still kind of neat, even though, as you said, it's a far cry from the old days where a lot of times the only way to get information like this was to physically be at a convention. Now, of course, we have the internet, YouTube, all that, so.
Well, yeah, but see, I've been going since 1974, or I was going before 1974, way back when it was at a hotel and there was like 100 people there.
And then it moved to the downtown Civic Center where everybody was going, oh my God, how will we ever, take over this huge space?
Right.
And, I guess we're turning into old fogies because I kind of miss the old downtown center.
Well, I mean, it's still there. They used to have the costume contest there.
But then they got too big for it.
So it's, I don't know. I mean, I would love to be able to go again, but it got to the point where there are so many bodies in that convention center that there are places where you just stop. Not of your own free will, and for 20, 25 minutes, you are standing in one place because you cannot physically move because the wall of bodies is so, it's horrible.
People, I will tell you something, if you go to the con, yes, we all want to take photographs and we all love costumes, but please, for God's sake, show a little respect and don't just stop the entire row. And also, I'll tell you 2 problems I had this time of year. And some of the people on the hover-round seem to think that being on a large electrically powered object gives you the right to forge forward like a damn icebreaker. I'm sorry. I know you really shouldn't do that. Now, I will say one thing though. This year, the con security and the people in charge of moving, people around, they were doing very well. It was a difficult situation. They were always keeping their cool. They were moving people, being polite, telling people, okay, look, we know you want to stop for the freebie, but, we got to keep this section moving. So in that, I have no complaints at the con. The sole problem with the con is honestly just too many bodies for a given cubic foot space.
Yeah, well, I mean, I honestly think that whole thing, it's just a problem with society. I mean, society, people used to think about people other than themselves. And today, it's not just going to a convention or whatever. People are just goddamn dicks everywhere. You go grocery shopping, and people will just stop their cart in the middle of the frickin' aisle where they're blocking all traffic both ways, and they're just sitting there talking on their phone. And they don't give a shit about anybody else. People are just dicks today.
Well, in some cases. I mean, a lot of it also has to do, I mean, I remember there was a football team, a professional football coach who was bitching about cell phones, and he said that, used to everybody would talk, but now you just get on your cell phone, you look around, and I think it's really easy, not so much to be deliberately dickish, but you create a little bubble around you, and you don't really recognize that, okay, well, there's stuff going on outside of this bubble. But, yeah. And to the people off here, I will tell you, if you ever want to go to San Diego when it's not Comic-Con, go. It's a nice city, a lot of nice stuff to do, really pleasant. Of course, since I've been going since I was 5, and the last time I went with my parents before they took a powder was to Comic-Con, I may be a little, prejudiced in favor of San Diego. But,
yeah, no, I would, I'd rather go to other conventions where they're not wall-to-wall human funk. And let's be honest, that's exactly what it is.
That is true. On the last day of the convention, when half the people have not bathed, it can get just a little ripe. But I didn't walk as much at this convention because, of course, my car being dead for 2 weeks, I've been walking way too much lately. So I actually spent some time in the anime room just sitting because my legs were saying, okay, we're sitting. But I want to go over it. We're sitting.
That's because you're old.
I know I'm old, and I'm looking at people, and someone was talking about this really old classic video story that they wanted to see, Dirty Pair Flash, and it was so old, and that's when I thought, can I crawl out of here and just die in the corner? Because I actually remember the original Dirty Pair coming out, and that was something. Yeah, anyway, let's just drop this. I'm feeling old again. I'm noticing cobwebs springing up all over me.
Okay, well then I guess we can go do the news, and then we'll stop making fun of your age.
You're as old as I am.
I'm older than you are.
Oh, good. Okay, we can make fun of your age. All right. So,
okay.
And now the news. Well, we've already found a secret memo coming out of the Justice Department. They're now going to go after 12 new perversions, things like bestiality, polygamy, having sex with little boys and making that legal, and not only that, but they have a whole list of strategies to go after the churches, the pastors, and any businesses that tries to assert their religious liberty. This is coming, and it's coming like a tidal wave.
All right, so Congress, I just want to get this straight. So you are aware of a Justice Department memo that says there will be an effort to legitimize or legalize bestiality, pedophilia, and, as you put it, perversions?
That's correct. That's correct. They're coming down with 12 new perversions. The LGBT just isn't is only the beginning. They're going to start expanding it to the other perversions.
All right. Well, nothing anymore would surprise me. Absolutely nothing would surprise me.
And to think that Tom DeLay was ever a member of Congress. According to DeLay, as he appeared on Newsmax TV, all hell is breaking loose now that the Supreme Court has legalized gay marriage. But they're not through yet. In fact, DeLay claims he's aware of a top-secret memo that seeks to legalize 12 new perversions, including bestiality and pedophilia. Dude, take off the fucking tinfoil hat.
Yeah, or maybe put the tinfoil hat back on, because it does sound like the rays from the Zorbox from Mars are getting to you. I mean, seriously, this is one of the big problems, and, a lot of times people ask why I think that largely the Republicans don't have much of a chance for the presidency. And this is it. There's a ton of things you can criticize the Democratic Party over legitimately, honestly. I vote Democratic more than once, and there's a lot of things I don't like about them. But when you do stuff like this, you just, it's kind of like running up to a person, telling them why they shouldn't pay for an extra tax about water in the city, and then say, and oh, by the way, they're going to take your child, drain their precious bodily fluids, and put them in the water supply. And you're surprised why a lot of people don't listen to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wonder what this guy's smoking or shooting up or whatever. I don't know.
Probably something on the 12 list of the 12 deadly new perversions.
I'm sure. I mean, clearly this memo doesn't exist. Anybody who thinks this memo exists is an idiot. And maybe this whole thing is just a Poe. Maybe it came out of the Onion and DeLay is just gullible. But if it isn't real, there's really only two options, okay? Either DeLay is so deluded and insane that he really believes that it's really out there, or he's completely dishonest and he knows it's fake, yet he claims it's real either. So which one is it?
And the fact of the matter is that neither one really makes you much better. You're either talking, trust me, I'm a lunatic, or trust me, I'm a liar. And I'm not even a good liar. Because, just honestly, for one thing, Mr. DeLay seems to miss the fact, which is sad because he was a member of Congress, but the Department of Justice doesn't legalize anything. If there is a law against something on the books, the Department of Justice has no role to legalize it. That's Congress's job. That's the president's job.
And you'd think that DeLay would know that, having been a representative. But he's unaware. He's completely unaware.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of these things that's just terribly sad. And like I said, it's just ridiculous. It is, unfortunately, I think, the ultimate degeneration of people who are now more interested in getting on a clickbait title than they are of contributing to the dialogue.
Well, it doesn't make any difference to them at all. And I think it was funny. There's a video that, I'll link to in the show notes, but, even Steve Malzberg of Newsmax TV, who is interviewing DeLay, he thinks DeLay is out of his gore. And if you're watching this, I mean, I was expecting his eyes to just go popping out of his head. He's going, "You're serious about this, aren't you?"
Did we give him the special water? Because he's acting like we gave him the special water, not the normal water we give guests on our program. Yeah, I mean, it's just such a clearly ridiculous thing. And, unfortunately, what is probably more disturbing than DeLay is the fact that there's a substantial minority of Americans, especially in the right wing, who will believe this.
Yeah, I mean, if you go looking at all these people, and they're the people we talk about all the time, the Klingenschmidts and the Fishers and all these people have got a never-ending flow of complete Looney Tune bullshit that comes out of their mouths every time they open it. and they never learn. And they've got people who watch them and listen to them and pay attention to their podcasts and whatever they write. And they write books and people buy these books. And I'm just looking at this going, oh my God, are you people all that stupid?
Yeah. It unfortunately is an example of, just how intellectually bankrupt the opposition has become to these issues. You know, there is no other side that can actually bring anything reasoned up, so they resort to things like this. You know, I have in my hand the names of, 12 terrible perversions, bestiality, dogs and cats living together in sin. And what's funny is that increasingly this stuff, using the Ghostbusters, this would have been the kind of thing that would have appeared in a comedy, but now you have people who claim to be serious figures bringing it up unironically.
Yeah, because these people really believe it. And that's the problem. And, I don't want to say that the Democrats are any better necessarily, because they're not. Now, granted, the things that they say aren't this batshit insane, but
Right.
They're still completely irrational, crazy nonsense.
Well, the thing is that you can disagree with it. Like I said, the problem is that for some things, the Democrats have their complete nutso brigade, obviously. I mean, you've got some people, but not as many of them end up being in Congress. And that's the thing that's happened to the Republican Party. And that's really the problem the Republicans are going to have before they can honestly move out and start getting, moving beyond this. They've got to go back to trying to become a rational party. And increasingly, they're not a rational party right now.
But we don't have any rational parties in this country anymore. There aren't any. It doesn't matter what side you're talking about. Both sides are just out of their freaking gourds, because both sides, they're not trying to appeal to the moderates, to the centrists, the people in the middle. They're both trying to go after the wingnut fringes, because they know that the people in the middle really have no choice. They gotta vote for them.
Well, the problem, of course, is the way the primaries work. I mean, let's face it, you have to appeal to the wingnuts, because the wingnuts are the ones who reliably vote on the primaries. Unfortunately, it would be much better if people did, but very few people by percentage vote in a primary. And so these wingnuts dominate the primaries. You have to pass the primary before you can even get to the general election. And that means that all of a sudden these people have a tremendous control over who the final election is. And then you're right, you get to the people, yellow dog Democrats and, loyal Republicans, who you could have a guy out there wearing tinfoil on a unicycle and they would still vote for him simply because of the R or the D behind his name.
Right. And unfortunately, and this is from both sides, unfortunately, is we're actually editing out the sane people. The people who actually might make decent representatives, those people never make it through and actually get on the real ballot. They all die in the primaries because they didn't aim for the crazy people. And then once we get to the actual election, all we're left with are crazy people to vote for.
Or the problem is you have someone that immediately starts to having walk back all his positions. And, that's another problem. If you're in a position where the only way to pass the primary is to lie, and then you spend the rest of the election desperately, running back as fast as you can. I mean, one of the issues is seriously, I think, is that we need to start having open primaries nationwide. Because, the more open a primary, and yes, there's always the potential someone could get a bunch of Democrats to try to vote a left-wing Republican in. The Republicans do the same with the Democrats. In practice, when states have had open primaries, that's not really been a problem. But it starts removing the strength of the extremists on either side. And if there's anything that can help this country, it's getting the extremists and neutering them so that both elections represent a better view of what the general electorate thinks is important. Because the general electorate, by and large, is fairly moderate on both sides. I mean, the Democrat electorate is left, although, Republican would say they're screaming center-right, but, for American politics, they're to the left. The Republican general electorate is to the right, but both electorates are more or less more to the, center-left, center-right. It's the extremes that pull them all the way to the fringes.
Right, and unfortunately, we've got way too many extremists out there running around.
Who can dominate it via the primary process, yeah. And that's...
I mean, you've also got the people who... There are some really crazy fucking people out there. And we've got a lot of people who... Let's be honest, let's look at TV. I mean, there's all kinds of ghost hunter... all kinds of really crazy supernatural bullshit TV out there, people out there looking for Bigfoot and all this crap. And there's way too many people who are willing to tune in to this to look at the freaks dance. And that's kind of our politics too.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where part of it is clickbait. I am really convinced that, honestly, part of what's hurt us is this growing emphasis on stuff you can get out there to shock people so they suddenly become interested in you. And I don't know how it's going to be fixed. Like I said, I'm just hoping that gradually we do get fixed because, we're the most powerful country on earth. We really need good leadership.
Yeah, too bad we don't get it.
So
you want to go ahead and pop to the next one?
Yeah, I think we should pop to the next one. Because the next one's even funnier. Everyone remembers the Oregon bakers who were oppressed, sentenced, fined for daring to take the principled stance of refusing to contribute to Tom DeLay's 12 perversions. There is a friend of mine who often has a comment, it's more complex than that. In this case, it's more complex than that, in that, no. What they were ordered to pay for was causing their customers emotional distress by directing attention to them, bringing the case to the media's attention, keeping it there, making statements deriding the couple, and causing this attention that they knew would negatively impact them, and also giving information about their contact information, sharing the couple's personal contact information. This was actually not just a minor thing. This couple, the same-sex couple, almost lost custody of their foster children because of this. Now, I will tell you something. This is not just harmful to the couple. This is harmful to the foster children. It is hard to get foster families. Every state is always scrambling to find places to place children. So this also exposed the children to the potential of losing a stable environment, which they already are having a problem with, being foster children in the first place, the possibility of exposing them to danger, because let's face it, let's be honest, guys, there are wingnuts out there who will shoot gay people. We know this. It's happened in the past. You put a story like this out with someone's personal contact information, I'm not surprised the Child Services Department was a little nervous about this, because you put this out over the United States, there is a reasonable chance you may find someone giggling in his little attic who's deciding he's going to save the world from the young Christian gays by going out and shooting them. Again, this has happened. And also, it's important to know, this is actually not that unusual. It's not widely known because there's always a lot of misinformation out there, but one of the actionable causes for under liability or defamation is to give what's called public disclosure of private facts. In other words, if you have someone who's not a public persona, which these people were not, again, another important part of this case, they did not seek publicity, they were made public by the group who's being fined right now. They can come after you for disclosure of these facts, especially if you disclose them in a way that's intended to cause harm. For example, public disclosure of the private sexual affairs of another. Public disclosure of a relationship. Really seriously, so this is not some dramatic modification of long-standing law. This is something where they tried to cause a great deal of harm to a group for, ideological reasons, and it's looking like they got smacked for it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny, how the story that the religious right spins, it's not necessarily the truth. It's not even remotely close to the truth. They're just lying through their teeth, and then they're playing the victim card and acting like, oh no, poor us, we're the victims, when their side is the one that caused all the damn problems, and they got smacked for it. Now they're trying to go, oh, well, you didn't see us doing all this stuff over here. Look that way. Look, over there, it's a UFO.
And in all seriousness, it brings us to the question of what would happen if the bakery had simply said no, and then that was it. No, we don't really feel comfortable doing this. We don't know. Obviously, the couple could have protested. It's also possible the couple just said, oh, okay, well, I guess you don't want our money, and gone somewhere else.
Well, the thing is, the couple did protest. They sent in a report, and they weren't aware that when they sent in the report that
their public
that all of the stuff that they sent, the entire report, would be sent back to the bakers automatically, which included all of their information. And the bakers just turned around and posted all of that stuff verbatim on Facebook.
Right, and also, of course, if you're a business posting private information to someone who either was having a relationship with you as a business or had contact with you, that can be a no-no even beyond anything else. I mean, there's a reason a lot of businesses treat, customer privacy very seriously.
Right.
So to actually go beyond that and then publish it when it's a matter of a legal document, not right.
No, not at all. And the fact of the matter is that no matter how they want to spin it, what the bakery did was a violation of Oregon law, whether they like it or not, that they cannot discriminate against somebody on the basis of their sexual orientation. At the time that they did this, gay marriage wasn't legal in Oregon. Of course it is now, but like I said, but it was still the law that they were not allowed. They could not legally say, we will not do it for you because you're gay.
And that is a case where this makes this even worse. So, I mean, really seriously, this is another example of just the complete moral, desolation of this stance. Your entire stance is roughly gays are icky, and we're going to make their life a living hell, or more preferably, if we can, make them not alive. Because seriously, again, I keep saying it, but the reason why they are talking about not respecting marriage instead of going out and killing gays is that we would no longer tolerate that last. It's not because a lot of these groups somehow got enlightened all of a sudden. It's because, the state will no longer tolerate that kind of BS.
And they never should have.
No, they never should have, which is, we are much better off today than we were back, even a few decades ago. And I'd like to say, by the way, just as an aside, gay marriage has been legal in America now for, less than a month, but, I still have to admit, I have not seen the rain of blood. I have not seen the fires burning from the wreckage of Los Angeles where, society has just completely collapsed. Well, okay, collapsed even more so than it usually is in LA. But seriously, looking outside my window, the world seems to be much as it was the day before that ruling came off. I guess they were a little bit.
Yeah, we haven't seen God taking vengeance on America. Imagine that.
I know, it's almost as God either doesn't exist or doesn't care or is off playing at pachinga.
Yeah, but let's be honest, all the people who think that God exists, they're all just lying to themselves and others, and what else is new?
But yeah, so we are now in a position of, this case, this is a case, again, this is another thing to listen. First of all, I'd like to point out one thing. If there's, beyond this case, remember this. The first blush, the last blush, probably most news stories involving legal issues are horrible. Seriously, American news media is horrible when it comes to reporting legal facts. You will get a reporter there who completely misinterprets, doesn't bother to do any research, sometimes just omits information. So always carry a grain of salt, or more likely a bag of salt, whenever you hear a newspaper reporting on something that involves any kind of legal information, because they have a terrible tendency to just screw it up from one end to the other. Usually because they want to lead off with something that gets people furiously angry.
Yeah, but you got to remember, and that's not just newspapers, that's the entire media in the U.S. anymore.
Yeah.
They don't care about the facts. The facts are irrelevant. They need to find a way to spin it so that their audience, the people that they're tailoring the news to, are going to have the reaction that they want it to have so that they can go ahead and get these people to watch for another 24 hours. That's all that matters.
Right. And it is unfortunate because a lot of these issues, issues like this are fairly important. It is. It's, just recently there was a furious, angry, thing about how Canada is now censoring a man for, sending Twitter messages to a woman. It's being very much played as, this is Canada, and I don't like Canada's speech provisions. I prefer America's First Amendment. But then when you dig into it, you find out that no, actually the thing is the woman had a no-contact protection order against him. And speech doesn't enter into it because if the court says you shall have no contact with an individual, they mean no contact.
But of course they don't mention that stuff because it doesn't fit into their narrative.
Right, so because they want to have it that soon Canada will be coming and dragging you off instead of finding out, well, no, actually this is about what would happen to a guy in America if he violated a court order here. And that speech doesn't come into it because you're not being punished for speech, you're being punished for your inability to listen to and comprehend the fact that the judge honestly really means what he says. But that's about this, again, another case where the right wing proves itself to be a little truth challenged in the case of these issues regarding same-sex marriage. I'm not surprised. But speaking of truth challenge, I see that we're preparing to change America's government for the next story.
So let's go get that one.
Some 300 evangelical pastors convened in Orlando on Friday night with one goal in mind. This was to adapt their religious preaching in pursuit of office. Yes, politics. Now, Mike Huckabee, our presidential candidate, actually was slated to give the keynote address. He is partly one of the leaders of this national conference being dubbed as a Jesus camp. And the national workshops are ongoing. They've been set up by conservative activist David Lane, who said this. He said, Someone's values are going to reign supreme. We want people with our values to represent our values and interests in the public square, to be elected to office and to represent our issues. So they're talking about 1,000 evangelical pastors to seek governmental office in 2016. That is around the corner. And this is all about promoting conservative ideals and traditional biblical values. It sounds like a joke, but this is really happening.
Hey, if you can't beat them, overwhelm them. More than 300 pastors converged on Orlando, Florida to start a plan that eventually hopes to train more than 1,000 pastors to seek political office in America and thus push Christianity into the American political scene. They don't care about the separation of church and state. They want the church to take over the state. Are we at all surprised here?
I'm sorry, I just got some image of something out of An Officer of a Gentleman with a bunch of, with some Marine Corps drill sergeant screaming at a bunch of pastors because, one of the problems here is now, of course, it is not at all illegal for a pastor or an individual to become part of the Senate. I believe we've had some. Many do not because, more than a few pastors argue that, unfortunately, the duties of a pastor and the duties of a senator are, too opposite each other. And there is some point. You do not have to say something bad about a person to say that, no, if you've given your allegiance to one group, it may be hard to work in a Senate where, let's face it, making law is often like making sausage. And so, you don't really want to be there if you're unwilling to make compromises. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of idiotic simply because of the fact that, well, great, I can run a boot camp tonight for my cats to become political offices, but if you can't get elected, it's not going to change anything. And that's been the problem. They can't get elected.
Yeah, I mean, why would anybody vote for these idiots when it's very clear that they don't represent the people? They think what God wants. Although, of course, what God wants always tends to be strangely similar to what they want. So,
yeah, and I mean, the thing is this is another case where, guys, the battle is increasingly over. Culturally, everything they've aligned with has failed, and the United States is no worse for it. Homosexuals praying at the inauguration. Well, God didn't hit the inauguration with a meteorite, so I guess he's kind of okay with that. Red ink, that's not a religious question, that's an actual policy question. So, I strongly doubt God has an opinion on deficit spending either way. I could be wrong at the end days if we look up and we say, Adam Smith descending in heaven. I probably was wrong. But, in that case, I'm going to be with a lot of people who are wrong because I don't think anyone expected Adam Smith to be the savior. But, really seriously, on the other hand, there is something here you need to consider. When they talk about starting small and seeking office at the local level, that is something people for a secular American society need to listen to and need to understand. It's a big deal because we love to have these stories here about school districts. Last week it was a school district trying to, back creationism. The fact of the matter is that these small offices that you don't often hear about nonetheless have a tremendous impact on the American people. I mean, you probably, to be honest, you're probably going to be more impacted by what your local school district does than what the president does. In most cases. And so we can laugh at this, but we also have to understand you don't want to run the risk of a lot of these guys getting into office because, maybe out of 20,000 people, 500 people voted and they managed to get 250 people to put them in because then they are going to have real power.
Yeah.
Small scale power, but real power. And as we've seen with like the textbook debates, some of the issues regarding, same-sex marriage and harassment, that small power, multiplied by however many counties there are in America can be a fairly dangerous thing.
And I bet you if some Muslim group tried to do exactly this, these people would be screaming up a fucking storm going separation of church and state. But apparently the rules just don't apply to Christians. These people, I really look at this like this is the last desperate attempt to regain some of the power that they've lost.
Well, it is in a way, because obviously used to you wouldn't even have to do it. You would not have to worry about putting a pastor in office because you could bet that most of the people in office would be listening to the pastor. So in a way, this is another sign of them having to try to rebuild, trying to regain, as you said, a power that they have increasingly lost. I mean, I don't think we should underestimate the tremendous shock of the acceptance of gay marriage has been to the right wing in America. I mean, even among the Republicans under 30, it's a majority. Quite literally, when you realize that even among the party that bans itself as the conservative morals party, even there, you are seeing an ever-growing acceptance, especially among the younger, because nothing happened. Nothing terrible happened. People got married. They got married. They have fights. They break up. They get back together, and once again, this was proved, these groups were proved to be wrong. And now they're trying to desperately gain power so they can compel.
But they can't accept that they're wrong. They can never accept that no matter what happens, no matter what crazy crap they come up with, no matter what happens in response to the crazy crap they come up with, they can't ever, ever, ever be wrong. And sorry guys, but that's just not the reality that you live in.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, these groups are, if you could accept that you could be wrong, you wouldn't be in this position in the first place. Let's just put it that way. If they could accept that they were wrong, they needed to modify their position. But of course, the point is the entire argument they make is that their position represents basic, unchangeable, fundamental moral truths. These moral truths are always brought through their mouths, through what they say, but nonetheless, they like to claim that we cannot change this moral truth because this isn't so much a question of morality in the sense of something we do. It's a law, like the speed of light. And you can't change, and of course, now they're finding out that, it's not. Well,
no, they're finding out that the rest of the world says no, it's not. They're never going to change their minds.
Right, and they're losing their children. They're losing, the funny thing is this is very much like happens, as a historian, when you start reading about a lot of the revolutions, you realize how common this is someone would just change a little bit. They could keep most of what they wanted. That, the demands for change in the beginning are not that big, but they won't change. They'll stay, they'll stand, and as with this, you see them getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and more desperate. These are the same people who, like I've said before, if they could get away with it and go back and, segregation, if they could go back to slavery, if they could go back to polygamy, there's a lot of these people who will go, okay, that's what God said, here we go.
Never mind that God didn't say that. I mean, even if you accept it as true, that's the other thing, is in many cases, they really pick and choose. I mean, again, like for instance, Leviticus is such a big favorite among these people. Oh, they
parts of Leviticus.
Parts of Leviticus, and then they don't even bother to mention that Leviticus was largely aimed at the priestly caste of the old Judaic faith. A lot of that wasn't even intended for ordinary Joes. That was some of the rules and laws regarding, ritual cleanliness and things like that among the priests. But, they don't care. They don't have the ability to look at themselves from the outside and make any kind of
Which is unfortunately the problem is, they basically, they read the Bible, they read parts of the Bible that they like, they ignore the parts that they don't like, they reinterpret the parts that they can say what they like, and anybody who points this stuff out, they call you a heretic, and they scream that you're discriminating against them, and it's like, guys, you're morons. I'm sorry.
I'm an infidel? Ooh, cool, I'm an infidel. Or heretic. I don't know which is, I think I prefer to be an infidel rather than a heretic. It sounds cooler. But yeah, these people are just,
and they don't even know they're losing. That's the saddest part of this.
No, because if they admit they're losing, then they have to ask the question, why? If God is on your side, how can you lose? Well, there's two answers to that. Either God ain't on your side or there isn't a God. And neither answer is palatable to them, because to actually admit that, all right, maybe we are not representing God, even if you accept that God exists, they couldn't, because that would call their entire faith
and
into doubt.
Unfortunately for them, faith is everything. There is nothing in their lives. Their entire lives are completely centered on this ridiculous faith that they have. And to admit that any part of it might be in any way wrong means that everything about every part of their worldview just completely falls apart, and they can't have that.
Well, I doubt we'll have to worry. Like I said, keep watching who's running for your local offices, everyone, because local offices is where a lot of these fights are really fought. I doubt any of these guys will ever see themselves getting elected to, like, the United States Senate or House of Representatives, but state senates and House of Representatives a little more likely, and actually a little more dangerous. Yeah, when you get your little
ballot flyer and you're reading what everybody's position is, if they say Jesus about 147 times in the first paragraph, don't vote for them.
True. Now, if they say Cthulhu about 147 times, think about voting for them. They might give you some interesting fun.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Vote for Cthulhu, the greater of the two evils. Well, now we're coming to something where, Texas, the Texas Supreme Court has invalidated a requirement that commercial eyebrow threaders undergo 750 hours of training, 320 of which were unrelated to threading. Now, a writer for Slate believes that this is going to plunge Texas into quote-unquote a Dickinsonian nightmare, where, I don't know, starving eyebrow threaders throng the streets. In truth, the fact of the matter is that this is a case where some training is probably necessary. However, there is such a thing as over-regulation. I mean, in this case, he's arguing that the courts are overthrowing this agreement based on the due process clause, and the court argues that liberty includes the liberty of contract. Now, that has been used a lot in the past. That was one of the original arguments to prevent any organization among workers. But this is not involving the right of workers to engage in the liberty of contract. Just for a little bit of background material, the liberty to contract in the 19th century was widely held to say that you couldn't have a union, because a union would interfere with the workers' liberty to have an individual contract with, Rockefeller or Carnegie. Obviously, it was a flawed doctrine, and it goes away. And they're not talking about bringing that back. What they're saying here is that the state has to prove the regulation to be reasonable and appropriate, not unnecessary and arbitrary. Now, this is a good point, because the requirement of 750 years of training to become licensed is unreasonable. To put it in context, there are some states that don't require that much training, in terms of semester hours for things like, nursing assistants, veterinary technicians. 750 hours is the good part of, like, it's actually could be a couple of years of training depending on how you take your training, what your schedule is. And so the court holds, no, that's unrealistic. It's not saying all training is unrealistic. It is saying, however, that it is unrealistic, especially given that people who are licensed to apply eyelash extensions, which is a somewhat more complex and arguably more dangerous practice, only have to undergo 320 hours of training. I agree with the court here, because seriously, you're not going to be making a lot of money as an eyebrow threader. In fact, it's very menial, low-level work, and they're forcing you to spend potentially, as much as the article claims, as much as $9,000.
Well, no, actually, that was the low end. They were saying as much as $22,000.
Okay, I'm going with I was looking at the court opinion here. So, yeah, $22,000 wouldn't be out of it, depending on where you go and how much else they make you take. And, seriously, that's probably better than a year's wages for an individual who wants to be an eyebrow threader. And, you gotta realize that obviously you can't just go to work next year, presuming you can get a job as an eyebrow threader. You can't go to work next year and just pay that all back. So this is imposing a substantial state-imposed financial burden on these people for a profession that is really only a semi-skilled profession. And more importantly, it doesn't really give much backing for the idea that the state needs to impose this. Now, for instance, if I'm an electrical contractor, not all states do, but you can make an argument that, yeah, making sure you're not going to burn someone's houses down, we need you to take tests. If I'm a nursing assistant, you probably want to know I'm literate. So, I can understand that the black bottle with the skull and crossbones on it is not something I'm supposed to put in your porridge. But this is not that. This is, to be blunt, if someone screws up your eyebrow threading, you have a bad experience, they get fired. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a regulation needed to protect the health and safety of the public.
Oh, I agree. And I've seen this kind of thing where they wanted to make people who do like ponytails and braid hair get licenses, and it makes no sense at all. I mean, I can understand, okay, maybe you might branch out into professional hairstyling and that requires a license. But it's about as stupid as saying that people who trim animal claws just might branch out into performing veterinary surgery. How likely is this? Come on.
Yeah, and I would like to point out here that, the Slate article, it uses a very, when it's criticizing the ruling, it says something here that I want to attack right away. The problem with this theory, this is the writer, the problem with this theory that they can overturn it is that courts are ridiculously unqualified to decide whether economic regulations are reasonable or unnecessary. When legislatures pass health and safety laws, they usually do so after extensive hearings and fact findings. No, sometimes the legislature passes it because the nice people with big bags of money want that requirement to be in place so they can, the private school that they have now, getting money from is going to make bank on people going to that school. Equally, you could say that about anything. I mean, courts rule on thousands of highly complex issues every year. You could make an argument that, well, maybe the court was unqualified to rule on whether or not segregation is a good idea because obviously legislatures have passed those segregation laws after, extensive hearings and fact findings. The answer is that no. What the court is ruling in this case is that there are limits to what the Texas state government can demand of you. That, the due process clause says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. And the court's arguing that in this case, the liberty includes liberty to contract, and the state's got to prove that the regulation is reasonable and appropriate.
Right.
And that's pretty much a definition of what the court says. What this guy's evidently saying is that I don't agree with what the court's saying, so obviously it has to be a overriding of its authority. Well, no, it's not. You may disagree with it, but that's exactly what the court's supposed to do.
Right. I mean, I never really had much faith in the government deciding who has to take what classes and what licenses to do what work. I mean, where you've got a public health interest, I'm fine with legislation, but there's no conceivable public interest in eyebrow threading.
Right. I mean, and you get to the problem that in this case, what you're doing is you're creating, and this is my other problem with it. Eyebrow threading may not make a lot of money, but let's face it, it probably makes more money and it opens the door to getting further training in this field so you can eventually enter the middle class. But the problem is, if you keep putting higher and higher bars in front of these entry-level jobs, these professional bars, and again, 750 hours is a hell of a lot of schooling for this, you make it harder for people to enter this. You make it harder for people to start to put their feet on this path that hopefully will see them be able to enter the middle classes someday. And if they can't, that they look at this and say, well, damn, I can't afford this. I don't want to get a student loan for this because, I'm a fairly, I don't want to risk it. I'm just going to go back to work at Walmart. What you're doing is that you are locking them out. And in this case, it's not them who's locking them out. It's the state that is locking them out of this pathway.
Well, I mean, plus the fact that the state is really looking at this. They're going, oh no, these people are out there competing with people who have cosmetology licenses, which, damn, we make money from. So why don't we just require everybody to get a cosmetology license and get those nice kickbacks from those universities who are making all that money? And therefore, nobody can complain, and we've got more money in our coffers that we can waste on frivolous projects.
Right. And this is a problem. I mean, because the licensure can be a very powerful money generating engine. And really seriously, this is a case, and I hope to see more of them, is that you've got to start saying that, no, the state has to demonstrate a compelling cause. Again, California licenses veterinary assistants, California licenses nursing assistants, there's a fair number of things that are licensed in California, but most of them tend to be things where if I'm a nursing assistant, if I'm a veterinary assistant, if I don't know my job, something dies. You know, if I don't understand the job, I mean, there have been some people who argue, well, why do you need this? You can learn this on the job. It's like, no, I don't want a nursing assistant to learn her stuff on the job. But interestingly enough, for instance, California does not license, and I don't believe Texas license, brake mechanics. You can make a much better argument that you want to have to license a brake mechanic than you, can license an eyebrow threader.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, there's a ton of things out there that aren't licensed that if the guy doesn't know his work. So in this case, and also I think part of the problem is that eyebrow threaders, this field is an entry field for people who are not terribly wealthy and may not be able to fight it. Fortunately, in this case it was overturned. The court's telling the state, you are perfectly free to pass necessary legislation. This was not necessary. Take it back and fix it. And to be honest, if the state comes back and says, say, okay, we now have a licensure requirement for 75 hours of training. Say, you know, 75 hours focusing on hygiene, prevention of the transmission of diseases. The court's probably going to pass it. Because the court will probably turn around and say 75 hours is a reasonable amount of time for this field.
Right. But
you know,
then again, I mean, how much disease transmission can there be when you're pulling out somebody's eyebrows?
There can be some, you know, you could argue that maybe you shouldn't, but I'm just saying that the court is likely to look at a less draconian training requirement and say, okay, that's good, because what people miss is that the court really isn't, in this case, the court's not saying they can't have anything. The court's saying what they have was far too, extensive for, the need. That's why, you know, and if they want to do that, I expect they probably will, and then there'll be some back and forth, and it'll get passed. But, you know, that's one reason I was annoyed at the Slate article, because, you know, it was saying how terrible the court was, and the court wasn't even saying you couldn't. The court was saying what you have is too much.
Yeah, I would honestly say that anything is too much for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that, if you're going to have some kind of hygiene training, it sure as hell doesn't need to be that way.
Right. I mean, I would even say, okay, it's going to be an afternoon sometime.
Yeah. Well, to be blunt, when I was substitute teaching, and I think the same policy goes on in Texas, it was take a 3-hour test, which is still good. It's good forever. Go sit down, have a 2-hour orientation meeting, and the next day I taught my first class. So, you know, 750 hours is pretty damn overextensive when you look at it in that view. They let me deal with children with about 4 hours.
Right. And I mean, let's face it, the worst conceivable case scenario for eyebrow threading gone horribly, horribly wrong is what? You lose your eyebrows and they have to grow back?
You lose your eyebrows. I mean, you know, there are possible contagious diseases, but they are really kind of unusual. I mean, you know, it reminds me of some of the things that were done. What contagious diseases with the eyebrows? There's no transmission of bodily fluids. You know, it's not like you pull out a hair and you start getting this, you know, jetting shot of blood. Let me see if I can find
I cannot imagine anything unless you do something horribly, horribly, horribly wrong, like you drop something in somebody's eye. You know, there's nothing that you can actually do that would harm anybody at all other than you're going to look funny for a couple weeks.
Well, the argument is that there are some things you can spread. Staph infection, you know, flat warts, pink eye. But, you know, again, this is something that is, really unusual. I mean, it's the kind of thing that's unusual. And to be, again, brutally honest, you could justify 750 hours for just about any field if you go on that. I mean, what about food preparers? Oh, holy hell, you know, if an eyebrow threader is a danger of spreading contagious diseases, you know, I'm not going to go into the Del Taco unless I'm wearing a level 4 biowarfare suit. You know, it gets into the problem is that this could be extended to anyone.
And I'm sure that Texas and probably a lot of other states, if they could get away with it, they would.
They could get, which is, you know, and this is another point. Let's get into another factor. States love to regulate stuff like this because it spends the money. And when we were talking about Ferguson with all the various, ridiculous laws that they were using, this is another aspect of it. And this is again something that falls mainly on poor people because poor people don't tend to be able to fight it. Obviously you're not going to care about what kind of licensure requirements. If you're a physician, you're probably making a lot of money. But this is another case where the state, under the guise of protecting people, actually harms a lot of the lowest socioeconomic levels by adding increasingly onerous requirements that tend to block them out of being able to progress up the employment ladder. Because, being an eyebrow threader, you may just stay there, you may eventually become a full-on cosmetologist, but it probably honestly has a better chance of lifetime advancement than, say, working at Del Taco. Because Del Taco, you're just going to work at Del Taco for the rest of your life if you don't get another job. There is no real advancement there. So, this is a case of the state, I think, is hurting. I think the state, I'm happy this is overturned because it's hurting the people who need the help the most. And the people who are most interested in improving themselves. That actually surprised me, but, that they would have so much education required on this. I was thinking, what the hell did you do? 750 hours. I think I got my master's degree in history with less than 750 classroom hours.
Well, I don't know. Maybe they'll have a doctorate in eyebrow threading.
A doctorate in eyebrow threading. I hereby confer that. Yeah, I mean, really seriously, that is something that this was just a complete overreach. And I'm happy. And, the problem is that the slate people are upset. But this is another case, seriously, where the courts are undertaking their constitutional responsibility to tell the state when it exceeds its authority. That's what the courts are there for. Now, I will say one thing, because we have one of our articles we're using. It says, the question for the Reason article, is this the most libertarian legal opinion ever written? No. No. It is a fairly standard example of a court going after an overreach. The court is not striking down all regulations. The court is not saying there is no such thing as regulation. The court is saying, in this case, you violated a fairly long-standing principle and you need to fix it. Now, that's the other dangerous thing when reading these cases, because there's been some people that have tried to make it into far more than it really is.
Yeah, it's really nothing major, but, everybody, both Slate and Reason kind of, spun it out of control a little bit.
They're close frenemies.
Yeah, I guess. All right, well then, maybe we should get into the main event.
This is the main event!
The main event. Today we are revisiting the past. The ghosts of Christmas past.
Yeah. We keep doing stories and saying, we ought to revisit this, and then we never do it. So here's a couple of stories that we've done since the beginning of season 2 and where they've gone, at least for the moment. I need people to understand that there's a lot of stories that we've said this about, and nothing's really happened. So it's not that we've forgotten, it's just nothing's gone on. So we've picked a couple of stories that we've actually addressed in the past, and then something has happened, so we decided we would go ahead and revisit them momentarily. So, back in episode 2.6, we did a story about a Colorado barbecue joint that had a white appreciation day, and the massive backlash that came from the mouths of liberals about how horrible it is that anyone here recognized whites. Non-whites? Sure, but whites? Heresy! So, they did have the event. It went off without a hitch. It was ridiculously popular, filled the barbecue place beyond capacity for the entire day, and nothing bad happened. Wow, that was a good story, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things here is that the people who got protest, now obviously, say had this been someone from the Aryan Regional Association number 666 had announced it, you probably would have been advised to think it may not be the nicest thing. But these people were Hispanics, and it started as a joke. And, one of the problems is if you're going to start throwing around accusations on either side, you might want to investigate a little bit before you did it. There was, one man there with a Confederate flag, nobody else. It was a mixture of Hispanics, whites, blacks. The thing is that this is just a couple of guys having an event. You've got Irish Appreciation Day, you've got, Italian Appreciation Day in some places. Really seriously, I'm a little surprised it became as big a story as it did, but it was an example of how things can, get into the media, the evil white appreciation day, and we don't bother to mention that the guys who own the place are Hispanic.
Well, like I said, it's all about spinning things for your own narrative. That's what this is.
Is there anything for you? well, fortunately nothing bad happened and they had the day, and it looks like they did a swimming amount of business, so I'm kind of happy.
Yeah, I mean, they did receive bomb threats, but police bomb dogs came by and swept the place, and there was no actual violence that happened.
And sad to say, but these days a bomb threat is one of the low-hanging fruit. With the internet, it is so damn easy from your parents' attic to call in a bomb threat. And I am fairly certain before long, whoever did call in the bomb threat may be having an uncomfortable interview with their local PD, because very few of these people are as clever as I think they are.
Yeah, that's true.
Which, mind you, doesn't make me upset at all, because if you actually call in a bomb threat to threaten somebody's life, should you be having an uncomfortable meeting with your local legal association, legal establishment, I will play you the world's smallest violin.
That is true. So, anything else to do on that one, or are we just going to keep moving on? I mean,
No.
these are all pretty short, so we're just going to kind of ding, 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 and just keep moving through them. Next, in a story from show 2.10, we talked about a Mississippi school superintendent who brought disturbing the peace charges against an exuberant family who cheered at a graduation ceremony. And unfortunately, the superintendent has so far refused to drop the charges, which carries a maximum fine of $500 and up to 6 months in jail.
The joy of just doubling down. This is, and again, when we talk about how to make your little community a laughing stock, I'm looking at the reference right now, the Daily Mail. This is a United Kingdom newspaper. People in the United Kingdom who have never even heard of the school district before now know it as a school district that throws parents in jail if they cheer too loud. Not a good way to boost for your community.
Right. And the local ACLU has already said it's unconstitutional to make any law that would impede the freedom of speech, and they're ready, willing, and able to represent the family if this actually goes anywhere. This could just completely fall apart, and hopefully the superintendent's going to lose his job over this, because this is stupid.
I don't know if the ACLU could use that argument because the school argue it was content neutral about speech. It was about disorderly conduct. Now, the fact of the matter was, if I was a judge, I'd look at the school district's lawyer and just ask, really, guy, quit while you're behind. Okay? Just ask to withdraw the charges and quit while you're behind, because this is stupid. I mean, jail time of up to 6 months. Now, okay, granted, back to lousy legal reporting, for those of us who don't know, you very, very, very seldom do much jail time. I mean, whenever a news article says this person could go to jail for up to 10 years or X number of months or years, usually it's nothing like that. I would be very surprised if the court sentenced them to any jail time whatsoever. But regardless, the threat is still there for cheering too loudly for your children who have just completed 4 years of, oh my God, thank God, they're finally graduating and they're possibly out of the house school. This is just a case of ridiculous government overreach, ridiculous overuse of the state's police power, and to be blunt, a tremendous waste of time for everybody.
Yeah, but this is Mississippi, so...
This is Mississippi, and that is another factor, is that why is, a lot of these little towns are little fiefs. One of the nice thing about the internet is we have shown light on so many places that were just these little, knots of horribleness with the local government. And I think this is another case where you have a culture in government and that, knowingly or not, really doesn't seem to feel that the people around them have the rights of actual citizens. Because this is such an overreach of the authority, because to be brutally honest, they're never coming back to school.
Yeah, I mean, really, what are you punishing? Because they're gone and you're never going to see them again.
And no one's going to remember this in a year's time except to think you're a jackass. And again, there have been screaming and shouting at every graduation ceremony I can recall. I can't recall anyone ever being charged with a crime for it. So this is just the school doubling down, and I hope they lose the case. I hope they lose the case sufficiently badly that they look like complete idiots. And,
I'd like to see them get severely fined, and like I said, I hope the superintendent gets his butt booted out of the system, but...
I would like to think that too, because you're wasting, my thought if I was a parent in that district is, why are you wasting time and money that's supposed to go to my kid's education? Because a certain amount of time and money is being expended in the school district. If you have such time to do this, obviously maybe we don't need a superintendent. There's such little work that you have to find work like this to do. So, It's unfortunate. I was hoping for an outbreak of common
Like I said,
sense.
it's Mississippi. All right, well, let's go to the next one. We had a long discussion on show 2.11 about the fall of the Confederate flag, but even though we talked about it a couple times since, there are still groups out there who are coming out in support of the flag, and these people are stupid.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes, they
there are some things where I think, okay, they've gone way the fuck too far. Now, one good thing that came out of this, South Carolina has removed the Confederate flag from the Capitol. It's flown over for 54 years, and they originally put it up because they disagreed with civil rights, so it's finally gone. Great thing. Fantastic job, South Carolina. On the other hand, we've got Memphis, who there was an early KKK leader who was buried within the city. They dug his ass up with his wife, and they're throwing their dead bodies out of the city, which I think is kind of childish and a bit overreactive, don't you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it gets to the point, and this is something I've discussed, like, the Stone Mountain Memorial. If anyone's ever seen the Stone Mountain Memorial, it's this lovely thing of, I think, General Lee, Jefferson Davis, and, I think Jeb Stuart or Forrest. I forget who the other guy was. Anyway, it's on it's one of the biggest murals in America, carved murals in America. And there's already people talking about, well, we should blow it up. It's like, no. Number one, I just don't generally like to be aligned with people who blow monuments up out of general principle. Number two, like it or not, we can't put this behind us and say, oh, well, we're going to erase it. This is our history. And it's not a pleasant history. It doesn't fit into the wonderful, okay, children, America came to the oceans and we were the land of liberty and, the men and the women crapped gold wherever they walked and we met the Indians in lovely brotherhood and then we sang Kumbaya and now here we are today. No, our history is a lot more messy than that. There was a time when the KKK was a major part of that city. Trying to expunge them from the city makes me think that, no, we're trying to put it all on them so that none of our descendants, none of our history was tainted or guilty by that. But that doesn't work because the KKK existed in a context where a hell of a lot of people in the South and some in the North.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like Texas. Now, you heard about the recent Texas textbook thing where they've now decided that Moses was a founding father of the United States, where they've decided that the Civil War and slavery just never happened. They've completely expunged it from their history books entirely. That's like way, way, way too far.
Yeah, that's just dumb. I mean, because the danger I always have, well, it's like, for instance, just to use Germany. It was for a long time, history had kind of been changed so that it was only those dastardly Nazis. No one else knew about the death camps, No one else knew about anything. They were just so shocked to know that there was gambling going on in this establishment. Later, scholarship starts finding out, no, a lot of people knew about this. A lot of people participated in this. The great Jew hunt in Poland was largely carried out by reserve battalions of part-time German soldiers. And I think a similar thing needs to be accepted in the United States. This is part of our history. And we don't have to cheer it like we used to, but we damn well need to
I have no
remember
problem with it being our history. The one thing that we don't need to have today is to be continuing with that history. That's what needs to go away.
No, we
the
don't.
Confederate flag, get rid of it. It's a symbol of something that we no longer need in this country. If it's part of your heritage, you got a stupid fucking heritage. Time to move on.
Well, and more importantly, why is it a part of your heritage? It was an official flag, not even an official flag of the CSA, but just an official battle flag for under 4 years. Is there no other heritage that can replace it? Because if there's no other heritage that can replace the Confederate flag, that doesn't say nice things for the South. The Third Reich flag went away quickly because honestly, there was a shit ton of stuff in Germany that was more representative of Germany than that twisted flag. And I'm fairly certain, I hope you can find something else to take the place here. Of course, I would argue that one problem is that do you need a symbol of your sectional unity rather than simply being a part of the United States?
Shouldn't, but they unfortunately seem to think that they do. All right, well, I guess we can just kind of go on to our last story. Finally, in a very recent show, we talked about several legislators who decided that their Christian beliefs allowed them to ignore the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage. Some people quit their jobs. Some offices just quit issuing marriage licenses at all. But here's a story that kind of lets us end the show on a high note. In Tennessee, there was a clerk's office that the entire office, everybody resigned their jobs because they refused to issue any gay marriage licenses. And luckily, they finally hired somebody new as an interim clerk. And even though he says, his religious beliefs probably say he shouldn't do it, he has promised he's going to go ahead and issue to anybody who comes along because he's going to follow the Supreme Court ruling. Fantastic job, guy. Jack Martin, you kick ass.
And I will say one thing. At least the clerks who resigned, I disagree with their stance, but I am happy that their decision was we cannot discharge our office's responsibilities while remaining true to our faith. Therefore, we will resign. We will not try to stay in and obstruct the process or stay in and say we're going to not do our jobs, but you can't fire us for religion. They made the determination their religion doesn't allow them to do this, so they then resigned and left office and left the way clear for someone else to come in. That is what you are supposed to do if you have an irreconcilable moral conflict with the duties of your
and
office.
I think it's funny. As some people have said, the former clerk, Gwen Pope, she was black, and it wasn't that long ago that a black woman in the South would never have gotten a job at the government in the first place. And now she just kind of walked away from her government pension, and she's probably not qualified to do much more than work at Walmart. So, good job there, Gwen. Nice step down.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm just happy that somebody, because we have way too many people in this nation on every side of the political spectrum who they want to make a stand, but they don't want to pay for it. You know, you'll see the person who makes a stand, then gets arrested and spends the rest of the time whining about, well, why are you punishing me? Well, you broke the law. I will expect a certain amount of admiration for someone who understands that, no, if you want to take a stand on this, it's going to cost you. And, okay, you know, if I disagree with her stand, I think it's a terrible thing that she feels that way because you're just locking yourself in out of meeting people who you might find quite interesting and congenial. But regardless, I will give her the credit that she did not do the 5-year-old temper tantrum thing some groups have done, which is say, I'm not going to resign, I'm not going to quit, but I'm not going to do my job.
There's a lot of people out there, like the people who they think civil disobedience means we get to ignore things, we get to break the law, but we get to be completely insulated from any consequences from our actions. And that's not how it works, people.
No. And in fact, that was one of the reasons, you know, one class I had, a bunch of people would ask, well, why did Martin Luther King go to jail? And the answer is, that's the core of civil disobedience. You know, you are disobeying the law, but you submit yourself to the civil authority to show, hey, I am not a criminal. I am not somebody who's breaking the law to try to escape the consequences. I am breaking the law because it is an unjust law. And I will accept the
whole point of accepting the consequences and getting punished is to bring attention to what you think is an unjust law.
To the unjust.
If you don't bring attention to it, if you just get away with it scot-free, what's the point of doing it in the first place except being an idiot?
Yeah. And so it's interesting. Again, another case where civilization did not collapse.
Yeah, well,
however.
Civilization is just getting more civilized all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, this is something that we should probably, because we always bring up kind of weird, bad things on this. But again, the world is better than it was in the 1970s. In the 1970s, if a gay person a gay child could almost always be committed to a state psychological penitentiary. Terrible things were accepted. Prejudice, racism. I mean, God, hell, some of the jokes that I was told when I was an elementary school student, in the 1970s, I don't even really like to remember them now. They were horrible. They were just awful. And, today, we now increasingly, even among our children, we are moving beyond that. We've got a long way to go. I mean, we'll always have a long way to go because it's a moving target. But nonetheless, in a lot of respects, we are a lot better off today than we were in the past. And we're
a lot better off today than we were a month ago. Come on.
Well, yeah, that's true too. I mean, and it's moving faster. And this will be an interesting thing to see if we can maintain the momentum because we're increasingly accepting the fact that people have a right to direct their own lives.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, not necessarily, but more so than in the past. I mean, we have come to a point where, because, it wasn't too long ago that admitting that you were a gay openly in most parts of America would put you at immediate, great physical risk. And in addition, physical risk in the sense that if you defended yourself, you would probably be arrested.
Yeah, but we're not just talking about gay marriage, being gay, that kind of thing. There are plenty of places where you're expected to be a particular kind of Christian, and if you fall outside of that, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, if you're a Catholic in a place where you're supposed to be a Protestant, holy shit, if you're an atheist, then you're going to suffer all kinds of potential illegally, but all kinds of legal discrimination, all kinds of social discrimination where people are just going to hate you because of who you are. And that's still a big problem out there. It's not as big a problem as it has been. It is very slowly going away. But from the right, or from the religious, let's just say from the religious, that's still very, very true. Then you turn around on the left and holy crap, there's a lot of, you have to act the way we want you to act. You have to talk the way we want you to talk. Oh my God, you can't say anything that we find offensive, or we're going to bring all kinds of social harm to you because, oh my God, you're not doing what we want you to do. You're saying things that we don't like. You're doing things that we don't like. You believe things that we don't like. So this is still a problem out there, and it's a problem that just has to go away.
Some places that's still true, but they're becoming increasingly smaller and they're becoming increasingly known and, mocked, derided, and legal action being taken against them. So I'm kind of happy for that.
Oh, I do too. I just can't wait until those areas just go away.
Well, I mean, increasingly they're kids. I mean, that's one reason why so many of them are interested in homeschooling today, because they lose their kids when they start seeing the big wide world.
Yeah, but there's a point in time when, I don't care how long you were homeschooled, there's a point in time when you gotta get out in the world and getting that cognitive dissonance between, here's what I've been raised to believe and here's reality just slamming you in the face. I think probably you get to that point and it's even worse if you've never been introduced to any of this stuff.
Oh, it is worse. I mean, that's one of the reasons why sometimes people who go homeschool, they just so completely lose their stuff when they get out into college. I mean, some of the people I knew in college that lost it the most were homeschooled. I mean, because they just came from an environment where, they only had contact with rude people. Their entire life was directed by their parents, and then all of a sudden, bam, here they are in school. They're adults. And it could get pretty sad. But, the good news is that the reason they're having to do the homeschooling thing is their dominance over so much of our school system, so much of our culture is going away. And increasingly even a lot of the homeschooled, after the cultural dissonance goes away, they don't go back to that. They go on off and live life.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing, and I cannot, because there was a thread a while back, and someone said, "Do you feel sorry for social conservatives?" And this was on a board, and I said no. And promptly I was said, "Well, why am I bigoted against them?" And I said, "No, I'm not. If they were just socially conservative by themselves, I could care less. I'd feel sorry for them because they're kind of not really living a life I think is a healthy life. But the fact of the matter is that they want to use their power to force me to abide by their stance. And that's going away, and that makes me happy. I have no sorrow.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're getting the same thing from both sides, where everybody is, you're going to do what I want you to do. Everybody has to do what we want you to do. It's not, you can believe what you want to believe. You can do what you want to do. It doesn't really matter. You don't have any actual freedom. It's, you are going to be pressured and forced into doing it our way, whether you like it or not. Screw off.
Well, I think in the long run, that's going to go away. I think in the long run, we're really going to get, the embodiment of the right to swing my fist ends where the other guy's nose begins, and that'll be the way things are, which would be a good way to do things.
Well, I hope so. All right, well, I think we're done for the week.
Yes, we are. Are we actually on schedule?
We're actually doing pretty good. Wow. All right. Well, there's your rational time for the week. Hopefully you got your fill, but don't worry if you didn't, because we'll be back in 7 short days with more. Let us know what you thought by posting at our website. Comment, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We always have a conversation going over on Google Plus and Twitter, so you really have no excuse. Stick around. We're going to be doing this all again real soon. Until then, stay skeptical. It just pisses the credulous off. See you all later. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Bitchspot Report podcast. We invite listeners to interact with the show by commenting on our website at report.jdragononline.com. We can also be found on most social media sites, including Facebook, Google+, Tumblr, and Twitter. You can also listen on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Player FM, as well as on the aforementioned website. New episodes post every Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. Those interested in being on the air, please visit our website. All instructions are there. We appreciate our listeners and supporters. We couldn't do this without you.